You send the email, you close the laptop, you did everything you were supposed to do today, and you did it well. But somewhere between finishing that task and lying down at night, there's this low hum, a quiet restlessness you can't quite name. Not panic, not sadness, just this constant sense that something is slightly off, that you might have said the wrong thing in a meeting, that you probably should have checked that report one more time. From the outside, you look completely fine, reliable, put together, maybe even the person other people lean on. But on the inside, the engine never really stops running. If that feels familiar, this video might explain something you've been carrying for a long time without knowing what to call it. There's a specific image that psychologists use to describe this experience: a duck on water. From above the surface, the duck appears effortless, calm, gliding. Nothing about the way it moves suggests struggle, but beneath the water, completely out of view, its legs are moving frantically just to stay in place. This is what high-functioning anxiety looks like from the outside. The person who is always early, the one who responds to messages quickly, over-prepares for every meeting, never misses a deadline, they look composed, they look in control, and in a lot of ways they are. What's harder to see is what it costs. Because high-functioning anxiety isn't the anxiety most people imagine. It doesn't look like withdrawal or avoidance. It doesn't freeze people in place. Instead, it does the opposite. It pushes forward. It overfunctions. It uses productivity as a way to manage the internal noise. The busyness isn't just ambition. For a lot of people, it's regulation.
Stillness feels threatening. A quiet evening without tasks can feel more uncomfortable than a packed schedule. Because when the doing stops, the thinking gets louder. The experience of high-functioning anxiety is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It lives in the small, quiet moments. It's replaying a conversation from 3 days ago and wondering if you came across wrong. It's reading a text twice to make sure the tone was right before you sent it. It's that moment after finishing something well when, instead of feeling satisfied, your mind immediately moves to the next thing that could go wrong. Does this feel familiar to you? You can share what you noticed in the comments. Sometimes putting it into words brings clarity. There's often a persistent sense of impending doom, not tied to anything specific, just a background feeling that something is about to fall apart, that the careful structure you've built around your life is somehow fragile, that if you slow down even slightly, it might all unravel. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a fight response to anxiety rather than a flight response. Instead of running from the discomfort, people with high-functioning anxiety charge directly at it, working harder, checking more, preparing further. The anxiety gets channeled into output, and the world often rewards that output, which makes the whole thing more complicated. And here's where it gets interesting, because a lot of people with high-functioning anxiety don't identify as anxious. They identify as driven or responsible or high-achieving. The anxiety gets disguised as a personality trait. Perfectionism sounds like conscientiousness. Over-preparation sounds like dedication. The inability to say no sounds like generosity. These behaviors get praised, reinforced, and mistaken for strengths by the outside world and often by the person themselves. So the internal experience gets dismissed. You're doing well, so what do you have to feel anxious about? You're succeeding, so maybe the discomfort is just part of the process. But the body doesn't agree. Chronic jaw tension, shoulders that never fully relax, nights where the mind keeps running long after the body is exhausted, that wired but tired feeling, where you're depleted but somehow still alert, still scanning, still on. The success is real, but so is what it's costing. One of the more subtle patterns in high-functioning anxiety is how deeply it can shape a person's sense of self. When achievement becomes the primary way someone experiences their own worth, the internal standard never really settles. Meeting a goal doesn't produce satisfaction, it just raises the bar. Something that should feel like an arrival becomes another starting line.
Psychologists call this contingent self-worth, the experience of feeling acceptable only when performing at a certain level. It means there's no real resting place, no version of yourself that feels okay without output. This creates a quiet exhaustion that most people around you won't notice, because your output hasn't changed. You're still delivering, you're still showing up. But internally, the cost of maintaining that level is quietly compounding. And because you appear capable, people rarely ask if you're okay. You don't look like someone who needs checking on, which can create a strange kind of loneliness. Doing a lot, carrying a lot, but receiving very little acknowledgement of that invisible weight. That's not weakness. That's what it looks like to have built a very effective system for coping, one that works until it doesn't. What's worth understanding about high-functioning anxiety is that it often exists in the gap between who someone appears to be and who they experience themselves to be. The gap between the calm exterior and the constant internal motion. Between the reputation for having it together and the private sense that everything is always slightly at risk. Recognizing that gap doesn't mean something has gone wrong. It means you've been working very hard for a very long time, with very few people knowing the full picture. There's a meaningful difference between anxiety that shuts someone down and anxiety that drives them forward. Neither one is more valid, but the second type often goes unacknowledged because it's invisible beneath the performance. When someone understands that their busyness might be protection, that their perfectionism might be fear wearing a different name, that their helpfulness might be a way of making themselves harder to criticize, something shifts, not in what they do necessarily, but in how they understand why. And that understanding matters, not as a fix, just as clarity. High-functioning anxiety is the experience of functioning well and struggling quietly at the same time, of appearing composed while the internal effort to stay that way is immense, of being the person others rely on while rarely feeling like you can exhale. It isn't random, it's a pattern, one that often forms early, gets reinforced by success, and becomes so familiar that it stops feeling like something unusual and starts feeling like just who you are. Once you see it clearly, something changes. Not because awareness fixes everything, but because understanding a pattern is the beginning of relating to it differently. It was never random, it was a pattern. If this explains something for you, there's more to uncover. We explore patterns like this regularly. You're welcome to stay. And if this resonated, you might consider passing it along to someone who would feel understood by it.